so many times in our relationships when we're trying to move forward after infidelity, it just feels like we're towing upstream. The lack of knowing how to have necessary conversations that lead to an emotional tension sometimes you may feel between you that is so heavy you can cut it with a knife. One of the biggest enemies of your marriage or relationship being able to recover from an affair is the silence, avoidance, and frustration that can often sit in the space between you and your mate. If this is you today and you do feel stuck, I want you to consider some different small ways you can approach your mate and break these patterns. I'm going to share 3 things that you can try to help you if you find yourself in this pattern of feeling really stuck, or your relationship is in this pattern of silence and avoidance. One of my first jobs in my early 20s out of college was I got to be a logistics coordinator for a large barge company. And if you've ever crossed over any of the major bridges in the United States, over the river systems, maybe the Mississippi, for example, you've likely seen on the river towboats along that are pulling what looks like strings of a lot of floating boxes or barges. These barges, they carry thousands of pounds of cargo, maybe grain, steel, other commodities, up and down throughout all of the inland waterways in our country, down to the major ports out into the ocean. So the job was pretty fun, and I got to navigate a lot of how to get all of these things from point A to point B, whether empty or full. But there was one basic truth that was always at play, whether you realized it or not, that was factoring into the decisions of how to coordinate all of this river traffic. All rivers flow downstream, right? Well, when moving barge freight, you always needed to know, depending on different conditions, it's always going to take twice as much time to move cargo up a river than down a river. So what would take 1 week to go down would take 2 weeks to go up. Kind of like an escalator going, when you're walking up it, it's going to take longer to go upstream because you're fighting that current and that natural flow the entire way. I think so many times in our relationships when we're trying to move forward after infidelity, it just feels like we're towing upstream. We get frustrated. And here's the thing about frustration. It's going to cloud our thinking. It's going to drain our energy. And man, can we quickly lose our patience. Not that we had a whole lot to begin with, because chances are you're pretty exhausted. So if you or your partner have felt stuck in this pattern of silence, avoidance, frustration, I want to remind you that it's not impossible, but pushing through this, as you know, is going to be tough. If you want to break through some of this dysfunctional pattern of avoidance in your relationship, you are going to face some discomfort. It's going to require trying new things. And I promise, if you're human, you're going to want to give up and probably let that current just take you back to what feels maybe most comfortable and safest. Can you consider and remind yourself that there's a destination perhaps you can't even see for your marriage or relationship that's worth it upstream? So what exactly causes a pattern of distancing, silence, and avoidance in the first place? Infidelity is always sending a powerful message to the relationship, particularly in the betrayed's eyes that says, look what happens when you trust someone. When you give your heart away and connect, you're going to get hurt. This idea is going to instinctively cause you to armor up and protect yourself because you never, ever want to be hurt again in that way. And you pair this with what the wayward carry, which can be an immense shame that's constantly sending a powerful message saying, you don't deserve anything because of what you've done. You're untrustworthy. You cannot be trusted. So why even try? These two things together can sometimes pair up to create this vacuum, this void that at times can compete, and it just sucks the life right out of your relationship. Infidelity is always going to rupture any natural flow that maybe you once had in the relationship prior to the infidelity. Like a slow leak in a tire what happens over time is doubt is going to creep in and the ride is going to feel bumpier because your conversations, ones that used to happen more naturally and easily, they become strained. We start second guessing everything about our mate. We look at their words, their tone, and we don't always know what they mean. And the longer this uncertainty is kind of left unspoken and dealt with, the heavier it feels and it becomes. Sometimes so heavy that you maybe lose all confidence of how to even approach your mate. So silence becomes easier. And on an intellectual level, I think we all know that avoidance, silence, it's never going to get us the relationship we really want. But this broken trust, it can lead to this distance and we don't know what to do. If this is you, and you don't have much trust in your ability to know where to begin and get unstuck, first of all, you're not alone. So how can we start to break this pattern? What are some things we can try? Well, if I ask each of you right now to think about any conversations you've had with your mate that didn't go well, I want to promise you, none of us would have a problem recalling the hurt, the pain, the negativity. And part of what's happening with all of us is we have what's hardwired in us, whether we like it or not, is this negativity bias. And this just means we're easily more able to recall the one hurtful thing that our mate has said or done to us more readily than any of the maybe 5 kind things they said to us. What happens in this negativity bias, we can become so protective that we start scanning for signs of any rejection, even sometimes before it's actually real. I promise, as you're recalling these instances of things that didn't go well between your mate, it might have involved flooding, defensiveness, accusations, minimization, retaliation, maybe an entire bookshelf of things that you've said and done that have just hurt one another. All of these negative experiences, coupled with that hardwired survival instinct for negativity bias, leads us in a place where, it's easier to just avoid conflict. We want to withdraw just for fear that it's going to turn into only more confrontation, more misunderstanding, and more frustration. And I know none of you need any more of that. I recall in some of my own worst moments, often questioning if it was even worth it to try again. If this is you today and you do feel stuck, I want you to consider some different small ways you can approach your mate and break these patterns. The first tool that any of us can use to try to break through, particularly avoidance and frustration, is the step of humility. Some of you may know Brian Stevenson. He's an activist and an author. He considers one of the ways we can start to see connection and sameness with others instead of differences and fear is through humility. Stevenson says, we're all broken by something. We've all hurt someone and we've all been hurt. We all share the condition of brokenness, even if our brokenness is not equivalent. Sometimes, he says, we're fractured by the choices we make, and sometimes we're shattered by the things we would have never chosen. He advocates that our brokenness is also the source of our common humanity and the basis for our shared search for comfort and meaning, and particularly healing. Shared brokenness can take us back to the idea and the reminder that we sometimes need that we all have work to do. So the next time each of us want to write a story in our heads about what could be going on with our mate without actually knowing, sometimes we just need the reminder of humility. Sometimes we need the reminder of maybe it's our job to simply find the courage to ask them. No matter what side of the infidelity you find yourself on, whether betrayed or wayward, it's important to remember that your approach and your attitude towards your mate matters a great deal. I think it matters a great deal more than we often ever want to give it credit for. If you're struggling with feeling frustration, even resentment towards your mate, have you considered the idea of humility and what it might cost you to start to practice it? Another way we can start to break the pattern of avoidance is the idea of asking permission and asking questions. The breach of infidelity is going to leave your relationship on pretty shaky and rocky ground. But one of the ways we can start to add some stability to the relationship is through giving our mate the courtesy of asking for permission. Think about how you prefer to be treated. Most of the time, I gather you're gonna prefer courtesy. And my guess is you really like having a choice. As I said that, I just had a flashback of elementary school and a game we used to play at recess called Mother May I. But I bring that up to say that's not too far off from what I'm asking here when I get back to the idea that all relationships need some permission and courtesy. Sometimes this may be really basic and it sounds like approaching your mate and saying, hey, can I ask you a question before you ever ask the question? It also may sound like just asking your mate for permission if you could have 5 or 10 minutes of their uninterrupted time. What this can do is it not only gives your mate a choice, but it also offers them a much needed safety cue of what's coming next. So you may have to get in the habit of asking, do you mind if I share something that is important to me? I know there's times you might feel so much anger that you might even be saying, my mate doesn't even deserve courtesy right now. That's okay. It's natural. And when this happens, I'm just going to gently direct you, myself, and all of us back to the step one, which is that idea of humility and shared brokenness. Getting in the habit of asking permission will not only create goodwill towards your relationship, but it shows that you're prioritizing your mate's needs as just as important of your own. Asking permission can demonstrate that you care about your mate and that you do want to take a step to close the gap on the distance between you. Sometimes if we've gotten the sense from our mate that they do want to hear us, then here are some questions that I would invite you to ask that can help break through so you can start to understand what's really going on with them. Can you ask your mate, whether betrayed or wayward, how much has the infidelity impacted your sense that I really care about you? Or another question you may want to ask them is, do you feel that I can listen to you without interruption or judgment? Particularly when we talk about the infidelity. If you have the courage to ask this, their answers may give you insight as to what's really going on with them. In a final and third way, I'm going to offer that we can break down the pattern, silence, avoidance, and frustration, is to get in practice of what I call of being direct and honest. Honesty is always the foundation for vulnerability and real connection in a relationship. And directness, it means just how it sounds. It's a simple, small statement. We want to get in the practice of starting to name, not explain. And here's what I mean by this. How many times have you gone into a conversation with your mate just full blaze ahead, and before you know it, one of you has talked for what can be 10 straight minutes without ever making eye contact, without ever pausing, ever taking a breath, or checking in that your mate is even with you. Being direct, concise, and clear is a way for us to practice our own self-regulation. And when we start to kind of name rather than explain, we are being direct and simple. And it's just a sentence or two of saying, I'm wanting to be honest, but I'm afraid. Or maybe saying it's really difficult for me to open up. It can just be asking your mate, can you help me understand? What happens when we're indirect and we go into really lengthy explanations, again, we lose ourselves and we lose our partners because they cannot simply absorb that much information at one time. We have to know, as hard as it is, we're not going to get it all out in one sitting. And it's a real tendency, if you have been avoiding, to want to just almost overshare, coupled with some anxiety you feel as you start to approach your mate. If you're feeling a lot of anxiety, even thinking about approaching your mate, I want you just to notice what happens. What reactions are you having? It's really hard to stay present in a conversation when your body cues are giving you anxiety. But as best you can, Can you sit through it and observe? Your body will always give you clues as to what's going on with you, whether that's your heart rate, a weakness in your legs, maybe your stomach, or sometimes an overwhelming sense just to shut down. But what can be happening in recovery is your body's just trying to titrate the risk you're taking by moving closer to your mate. We want to learn to be both honest and honoring at the same time. There is a way to be both. It's always going to take twice as long to go up this river in recovery as it was to float down. So it's okay to just know that there has been damage done and the repair efforts are going to be lengthy and they're going to cost you. And I promise it's not going to feel natural. Bridging the distance on this relationship won't be solved in one conversation. But if you do notice you have a tendency to avoid, you can keep trying this. Direct, honest, regular attempts to check in. This is going to increase the safety level and it's going to demonstrate to your mate that you care. When they feel you don't care, chances are they won't take the risk back to be vulnerable or share back with you. If you have a tendency to avoid connection with your mate, any regular attempt you make to check in with them will increase the safety and the message to them that they matter. If your mate feels that you don't care, chances are they're going to almost retaliate. They're not going to take the risk back to be vulnerable or share. I know the path forward at times will feel like kind of towing all of those cargoes of barge upstream. And some days, let's all admit, it's going to feel like there's not a paddle and there's not even a shoreline in sight. Very few things in our entire lifetime are going to matter or truly sustain us more than a deep, safe connection with another person. It is going to feel risky to try to open yourself up and break these dysfunctional patterns of relating. And you know why? Because it is risky. You risk being misunderstood. You risk being hurt and frustrated. Risking will not guarantee that your mate is going to get it, that they're going to love you back, or that they're going to be able to give you what you need. But I want to tell you, by not risking, what we do guarantee is just more of the same, more disconnection, more silence, more frustration, and further avoidance.